I was unmuted. I have to start it all over again. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar presenting our study on the ever-pressing topic of biometric surveillance in Europe, and more specifically, the practices of facial recognition in public spaces. I'm Saskia Bricmont, Green MEP. I'm a member of the LIBE committee, so responsible for civil liberties, justice, and home affairs. I'm an active member of our Green EFA Group's ongoing campaign to ban biometric mass surveillance in public spaces, campaign which is coordinated by MEP Patrick Breyer, here present with us, and that will moderate this webinar today. We advocate for such a ban on artificial intelligence, on biometric surveillance, and also in the artificial intelligence legislation. We've been joined in our call by other institutional bodies, which is important to mention because it's a step forward. And of course, we also fight for this alongside with many civil society organizations, which are organized into a strong network. 2 weeks ago, it's important to mention that a majority of MEPs spoke out in favor of a ban on biometric surveillance, which is an historical win. We strongly advise the new negotiators that will work on the Artificial Intelligence Act and also the Council to deliver on this. Artificial intelligence is indeed a technology that can have direct negative effects on our daily lives. The algorithmic biases embedded in the technology are discriminatory, sexist, racist, and reinforce social inequalities. In particular, facial recognition systems are highly problematic and often misidentify non-white women, as well as trans and non-binary people. Many other fundamental rights are also endangered by these technologies: the right to privacy and family life, the right to an effective remedy, but also data protection. Even though biometric data are considered as sensitive and to be protected by the GDPR, the EU law has so far failed to explicitly and specifically prohibit mass biometric surveillance. This has led to abuses in member states and open violation of the EU law. Under the pretext of COVID restrictions, many governments have indeed expanded their surveillance infrastructures and started to secretly collect personal data. These experiments, often operating outside the legal framework, are therefore multiplying in Europe. And it seemed imperative to have a more systematic vision and a mapping of these developments. And this is why we want to thank Francesco Ragazzi and the team of researchers who are Elif Mendoz Cuscolmas, I hope I say it well, and also Ildiko Z. Playas and Ruben van de Ven, and also Ben Wagner, who provided us with the detailed study launching today on current and recent practices of facial recognition in Europe in public spaces, alongside an interactive map that will be shown to you in a couple of minutes. It shows us that the need for a ban on this technology is really an urgent matter. Francesco is Associate Professor in International Relations at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands, and a Research Associate at the Centre d'études sur les conflits, liberté, sécurité in France. His research interests focus on algorithmic politics. The report focuses on 5 countries in the EU, and we are delighted to have 2 speakers today with us: Jeremy Grossman, who is researcher at the University of Namur in Belgium, and also Charlotte from the organization Digitale Freiheit from Germany, who will explain to us in more detail the experiments that have taken place in Belgium and in Germany. I will now give the floor to Francesco so he can present the study and also the interactive map that they have been developing. You have the floor, Francesco.
Thank you very much, Saskia, and thank you very much for this invitation to explore this topic, which I think is absolutely central, at least for the years to come. So, I would like to start by saying that indeed, this I'm presenting today, but this is a collective effort. You mentioned the other authors, but I would like to mention them again. Dr. Elif Mendoz Kushkonmaz, Ildiko Playas, Ruben van der Veen, and Dr. Ben Wagner. So what I think is interesting about this issue is that, in fact, our report is probably, I don't want to be too ambitious here, but probably one of the first attempts to systematically map what is currently existing at the EU when it comes to remote biometric identification. So there have been, of course, other initiatives. I'm thinking, for example, of Technopolis in France and Belgium. There have been other NGOs and researchers that have worked in very detail on cases, but some of the things that we're lacking is somehow of a sense of the scale, a sense of the amplitude, countries. We might actually hear or we might know of some particular instance of an initiative or a country or a city that is piloting a project. We kind of get the impression that this is an epiphenomenon or is just being attempted here and we don't know yet what it is. But I think what we realize when we start looking at the project as a whole, and here maybe we can put the map, we can share the map exactly. So when we, just one second, I will show maybe this version here of the map, and I will tell you what the different versions that we have. But when we start looking at this map, we see that, in fact, there are already a very large number of institutions, be it government, law enforcement, of companies, research institutions that have been involved in the deployment of particular kinds of facial recognition systems, audio recognition systems, crowd management, all of which we can broadly group under the categories of remote biometric identification. So how do these projects manifest themselves so far? There is a bit of a dichotomy, which is also a dichotomy that is organizing narratives. And I will go into that. But on the one hand, what we have is a set of pilot projects, and they're generally presented as experimental projects, tryouts, ways in which we want to understand how the technology works, but also how the public feels about it. And all of these projects, I think, have one thing in common, and that is that they have what we could call a fait accompli strategy. They roll out the technology, they roll out all of the different aspects of it, and then they only ask later, or in fact, they're being told later that none of what they're being that is being deployed is actually conform to the current legislation in terms of data protection or in terms of basic EU law. So we can think of the Zaventem case in the Brussels airport. We could think about, for example, the mask check pilot project in Paris, or the biometric mass surveillance system that was deployed in Como in Italy of live facial recognition. All of them have in common that they started and then they were stopped because they were told by different authorities that they were not respecting the current legislative requirements. One thing that is generally specific about these pilot projects is that because they're pilots, they are connected to, in fact, rather small databases that are either collected ad hoc. For example, in the Zaventem experiment, it was passengers that were progressively collected into the database and then were used in order to train the computer system. Or they are, in the case, for example, of the Nice Carnival experiment, they were voluntary subjects by voluntary civil servants of the municipality of Nice that volunteered their information so that the system could be tried out. So in a way, one could say, oh, well, maybe the algorithms are frightening, but at least the databases so far are rather limited. And so therefore, before we connect those systems to very large databases, there is still a lot to go. And therefore, there shouldn't be so much reason for concern. So this is one narrative. Another, I think, important dimension, which probably no one really thinks about, or at least the general public doesn't really think about or is not aware of, is that facial recognition technologies are in fact used already by 11 member states of the European Union when it comes to judicial investigations. This is the so-called forensic or ex post use of these biometric technologies, including facial recognition, DNA recognition, fingerprint, and so on. And in order to interrogate data sets with biometric data, all of these countries and all of the law enforcement agencies of these countries have had, in fact, to adapt to create data sets that can be interrogated by such algorithms. So it's not automatic that because you have, say, for example, a large number of photographs in a criminal national data set, or as it is the case in some other countries, using the driver's license registry and interconnecting that with an algorithm that can then interrogate it, it's not automatic that these data sets, can be used for these functions. So it requires quite a lot of work, quite a lot of investment, and this is already taking place. Now you see that once we start seeing the extent to which these data sets that now, when we're talking about the forensic data sets, carry hundreds and thousands, sometimes millions of photographs, and we put this narrative together with the first one about the pilot experimentation. In fact, from a technical perspective, the possibility of now interconnecting these algorithms and these technologies that are being tried out together with the data sets that are being developed becomes a real situation. I mean, this becomes really a reality. And therefore, we have currently a situation in which the only, let's say, reason why, or the only thing preventing large systems of biometric mass surveillance from existing is the legislative safeguard that exists that prohibit most of these deployments to take place. And this is why in our report, we agreed with EDRI's position when they were discussing the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, that in fact the distinction between this real-time pilot project kind of biometric remote identification and the more ex-post forensic uses, this distinction in fact is not really relevant, because ultimately from a technical perspective, they can be interconnected and they can be really used for the same exact purposes. And so therefore, the report's position was that a ban was really necessary in order to put a halt to the risks that were posed by these technologies and these developments. Now, in the little time that is left, I mean, the report goes into the detail of the technologies, of the deployments. It goes into the case studies, and we will discuss them further. But I wanted to take a little bit of additional time. I think I have about 5 minutes left to introduce you a little bit to this interactive map that we've been working on. And it exists on in two versions, in a way, and both of them are accessible. There is the version which is only the map, and there is another version which contains the report that we're discussing today. And I think, really interesting feature of the map is that as you go along in the report and you come across, for example, a particular deployment, let me take an example, in which you see, for example, the company BriefCam or the company Hikvision. So if I click here on BriefCam, a company based in the United States, by clicking on the link, we see the relations that BriefCam has with the different deployments in the European Union, but you can also take other companies here, and therefore then you see how all of these interrelations work. And here, for example, AnyVision, which is a company that also, is one of the companies we will probably discuss today with the Südkreuz Berlin example. Now, I would now briefly go to this map to explain more broadly how the map works. The map lists here two categories of entities. The first one, which is probably the one that is of more direct interest, is what are the current developments or deployments of remote biometric identification in Europe. And here we have very clearly a map of all the instances which we have been able to document on the basis of essentially desk work. So we haven't done the investigative work ourselves. Other institutions have done that, NGOs, newspapers, and therefore what we try to do here is really to try to summarize and collect them all into a map. Now, in addition to the deployments themselves, what we try to do is to show which institutions are there connected to this particular deployment. So here we can take, for example, the let me go here and zoom in on the pilot project Südkreuz Berlin, and we can list the companies that have been involved. So AnyVision and Idemia, and two important software and technology providers, Hertha Security, but also other companies across Germany. And so therefore, by clicking on this, we can see all of the relationships that have been mobilized by this particular project. If you go on this other map here, then you can also search with a basic search the Südkreuz Berlin project, and then you can have a much more detailed narrative description of actually what has been going on. But I think this is why the map can be particularly useful, to give a visual representation. Here we cite all of the sources that we've used in order to create this map. And maybe I will conclude this brief presentation by showing, I think, one of the interesting features of this map. And what it shows is, of course, it focuses on Europe. But when we look at the connections, we see that there are companies, Huawei, Hikvision, based in China, Panasonic and NEC in Japan, Oracle, Avigilon, BriefCam. These are important names when it comes to biometric remote identification. But a lot of the companies that are actually extremely active, like Idemia, for example, Hertha Security, Thales, which I should be able to find here in the suburbs of Paris, where is it? Or the Saffron Group. These companies have also been extremely active in the development of these technologies. And these are companies that do not come from China. They are really very much based in the EU, and they're also exporting those technologies outside of the EU. So maybe just to conclude on this point, there is, in fact, of course, a narrative about certain dystopias when we come to this theme. I don't think it's by chance that we see a concentration here of items in Hungary. We discussed this a little bit. We see the connections with China and with companies that are based in other countries, but there are a lot of companies that are themselves providing these technologies in Europe. And as we see also, a lot of cities, neighborhoods, law enforcement agencies, which are very happy to purchase the software and to implement it as soon as they can. So I will conclude my presentation here and give back the floor, and I'll be happy to take questions about both the report and the interactive map that we've designed.
Thank you so much, Francesco, for your presentation and also your work on this study. For the audience, if you have any questions to Francesco or any of us, please feel free to ask them in the chat next to the YouTube video or send an email to me. And we shall select questions for the Q&A session that we'll be having later. Now, for now, we'll be looking into 2 experiments on biometric mass surveillance in Europe. And they took place at Zaventem Airport in Brussels and at the Berlin Südkreuz train station. Our expert for the first case is Jeremy Grossman, a researcher in ethics of technology at the Research Center in Information Law and Society of the University of Namur. Thank you for joining us today, Jeremy. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss these matters. So I did not work personally extensively on this case, so I think indeed the report just published constitute an amazing piece of work. And the only thing I can really do relatively to the Zaventem case is simply to take back the timeline that's present in the report, as well as in the reports from the institution controlling the police information. So basically, indeed, that's the strategy of deployment seems to have been to have disregarded the legal basis that was needed for doing this kind of thing. And so in 2017, the police has deployed facial recognition in Zaventem in kind of a supposedly test setup. In 2018, you have an important modification of the Police Act, especially regarding the control of police information and the use of cameras. In 2019, you have a declaration from a police officer that they were using facial recognition. So that's how it became public knowledge. The declaration was made in the press. And right after that, the institutional body whose role is to control police information asked questions. And basically, I leave out the legal details of the argument. The bottom line is there is no legal basis in Belgium law for police to build a biometric database or manipulate a biometric database that would serve facial recognition purposes in the current form of the law. So that would be the Zaventem case, as I said, of which I'm not an expert. And so maybe there are 3 points, more general points, that I think might be helpful or are interesting to recall when we discuss facial recognition in public space, and I think are often forgotten somehow or left behind. So the first would be strictly factual. So before looking at facial recognition, let's look at studies that concern CCTV. And the first thing to say is that you have very, very few studies that document the effects of CCTV on crime reduction, and very few studies done in European Union, and to my knowledge, none at all in Belgium. So that would be a first point. Then when you read these studies, what's said in it is quite clear, is the effects of CCTV on crime reduction is extremely limited. So the very practical conclusion would be, one, states should better evaluate policies. So that would be the first thing. And the second thing, the second practical conclusion would be to say that if security is indeed the end in view, then CCTV do not look like the most effective mean of accomplishing it. And so states and politicians might consider other means, such as, I guess, rethinking police intervention in society or rethinking social policies. So that would be one important thing that one needs to remember before even talking about facial recognition. Then, this being said, I think there are two arguments for and against, let's say, surveillance technologies in general. The first is, despite that it does not reduce crime reduction, either CCTV or CCTV with facial recognition, it does ease police work. So that's one fact. And I think here one need to think, even if one doesn't want to, one need to think twice about the budgetary constraint, the hard working conditions, and also the difficulty to hire that the Belgian federal police is facing. The second point would be, and that's more of a bet, and that's an argument that you often hear, is that CCTV and CCTV with facial recognition, if consistently deployed over the whole territory, would improve security in the future. So that's a bet. As I said, the empirical conclusion of most studies said that it had limited effect, but that's still a bet that one can do. So that would be the two main arguments for it. And now I think two arguments against it. The first would simply say this security argument you just frame miss an important point. It's that security is in essence unlimited. It's always possible to make a situation more secure, but security is not the only thing that matters, and that's why limits need to be set. And that's what we are discussing here today, where the limit should be set. The second argument against the deployment of surveillance technology, biometric technologies, or facial recognition technology, I would say, is that, again, the security argument misses another thing. It misses that citizens need not only to be protected from private persons, but also from public institutions. And here, the argument goes as follows. It would be that public institutions are less stable than technical systems. So I might have trust in my government today, but not trust in my government tomorrow. And then the issue is to think through the relative asymmetry between the power that has a democratic state and the power of its citizens. And I think that's how we should predictively think where the limits need to be set. And that's precisely where this kind of biometric technologies and surveillance technologies or facial recognition technology force us to think, is that in their nature, they increase this asymmetry. And this asymmetry puts democratic society in tension with the security imperatives. So that's how I would contribute here to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy, for sharing your thoughts on the Belgian experiment. And again, to our audience, if you have any questions to speakers, please post them in the chat or send them to me by email, and we'll come back to them in the question and answer session. So now let's talk about the Berlin experiment. And we have with us Charlotte from Digitale Freiheit, Digital Freedom, which is a citizens' initiative for privacy and informational self-determination. And by organizing political action and parties, they raise public attention to the issue of mass surveillance. And in the years of 2017 to 2019, when the experiment was going on, they organized protests and raised awareness about the experiment and the tests at Berlin Südkreuz. So thank you for being with us, Charlotte. The floor is yours.
Hello, yeah. Thanks for having me here, and I will briefly talk about the pilot studies at the Berlin train station Südkreuz. They conducted tests on facial recognition as well as behavioral recognition technology. The pilot study was initiated by the police the Ministry of Interior and the German Deutsche Bahn. And we started in 2017 and was supposed to last for half a year, but then was extended by half a year. The study was conducted with voluntary participants, so 200 to 300 people provided their faces to be put in the database where the faces were matched against. And at the train station itself, there were two separate entrances, one where the study was conducted and the facial recognition systems were in place, and then another entrance where the facial recognition used. The volunteers themselves carried a transponder, which then activated the facial recognition system. So the systems were only active when the participants, the volunteers, passed by those transponders. And I have a picture, which also is a picture of our protests, where you can see on the floor, you can only see it a bit, but there is a blue big sign with a camera. Right now I'm pointing at my screen, which you can't see. But yeah, where it's showing that there the facial recognition technology is used. I myself passed by the train stations, and I must admit I didn't see those signs. They're pretty big, but I think everyone knows who is living in a big city that when you try to catch a train and you're busy, you're not paying attention much to your surroundings. So yeah, how well people have seen that there's facial recognition technology used is questionable, but that's how it was made, and there was at least the possibility to not take part. Yeah, in our protest, we try to raise awareness by being present and showing the invasiveness of those systems and how they observe and surveil you. Yeah, here by lining up around the people. And in the next picture, yeah, we have our big camera head, which directly points at people, and we distribute some flyers. And yeah, we often take that form of actions to directly engage with the public and to draw attention to this topic without, yeah, being on social media and maybe in a bubble where people only are, which already are concerned with the topic. And it's also a good way to engage with people with something which draws that much attention and also produces nice pictures, which then can be shared later. Despite the protests and the controversy around the test, as I said before, the project was extended by half a year. And in the first half year, tests were conducted with high quality pictures, and in the second half year, they were conducted with lower quality pictures. However, the pictures were taken from the cameras themselves. So that's kind of cheating with the system because, yeah, in a real world scenario, the cameras, the pictures in the database would not be from the cameras which are used for facial recognition, but from whatever cameras. The project was from the beginning claimed to be a huge success by the Ministry of Interior Affairs. It was claimed to, yeah, improve security, and this whole project is also called Security Train Station. And however, the report in the end of the project was only released half or with a delay, and then was heavily criticized by the Chaos Computer Club and the Berlin Data Protection Supervisor. The detection rates were claimed to be 80% in the However, it's only true when all three systems were combined. And for only one system, the best system had only a detection rate of around 78%. And the worst camera system, had only a rate of 12%. The false positive rate, so the amount of false alarms, is that when a face is recognized as being in the database, but in fact it's not, with around 0.67%, which seems low and was also claimed to be successful and low. But if one amounts for the people passing through the train station daily, the absolute number is still quite high. Around 90,000 people pass through the train station every day. So that would equal to 600 false alarms every day. That would equal to 25 false alarms every hour. And they would need to be checked manually by an officer. And everyone knows that if you have many false alarms, then you get used to it, you click them away. And the question is how usable a system is which has that many false alarms. And this is already a good false positive rate. One has to take into account that only 200 to 300 people were in the database at all. In a real world setting, way more people would be in the database. And additionally, the facial recognition systems were only triggered by the participants with the transponder. So in a real world setting, way more faces would be matched against the database because the cameras would be continuously detecting faces. So here we can see on how the narrative of that this increases security and this is a success is pushed by the initiators of this project, but the facts don't really support this narrative. In the second pilot project, behavior recognition was tested. The tests were supposed to start in 2019 in the beginning, but were delayed for half a year. Maybe also because of protests and the criticism of the public, officially because of monetary reasons. The goal of this project was to detect luggage standing around, following positions of objects and people, detecting crowded platforms and detecting helpless persons lying on the platform. And this was as a reaction on several incidents in Germany where persons pushed other persons in front of the train. How a behavior recognition system can prevent this pushing, which happens in seconds, is not explained by the initiators of those tests. And I have another picture of our protests against the behavior recognition and how it can rate you and how it just analyzes you as a skeleton. This project called Sicherheitsbahnhof, Security Station, is to be continued. There are news that this year new studies should be conducted over the next years. What those studies will be is not known yet. Also, for the behavior recognition, there is no report or anything on how the results were. And so in the next years, also more intelligent video analysis is supposed to be tested there. So there's probably more be concerned about out and do. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Charlotte, for your presentation and also for your activism in Berlin. You'll now have the opportunity as our audience to ask questions to the speakers by using the YouTube chat or sending me an email. And I've seen a first question to Charlotte asking what was the reaction of the people in the railway station when they found out about this project.
Wide range of people who are concerned and are interested in the project, and scary, especially I think in Berlin and yeah, with the whole and Germany and people coming from East Germany and living in a surveillance state, but then also people who are just passing through and are not interested and can't be concerned there. So it's always big. How can you engage people there and draw their attention to this important issue? People are busy and passing by often.
Thank you. And if I may add a question myself, the second test on the behavioral recognition that you mentioned, how does this compare to the similar system that's actually being used in Mannheim? Do you know anything about this? It's actually in use, it seems.
Yeah, I'm not so well in the picture about Mannheim. What's the current state there? I know they're testing, or it's being rolled out over several years now, and getting more and more cameras are being added to the system. They're also checking for suspicious behavior. That means how those two relate. I don't know, and what systems. I think the one in Mannheim uses technology from the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, some institute there. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Charlotte. And in the meantime, the audience can keep asking questions via the YouTube chat or by email if you like. And I would like to ask my colleague, Saskia, in many of the cases in this study, public authorities have been warned by data protection entities that their projects may be illegal, and some were actually stopped. So would you say that biometric mass surveillance is fundamentally incompatible with our fundamental rights? And what can be done to protect citizens from local authorities that are taking their own initiative and pushing for the deployment of these technologies?
Thanks, Patrick. I think the study really shows the fact that such technologies are being deployed everywhere and at every scale, also, as you mentioned, at the local level. There are examples showed by the study where actually the vendors are offering such technologies also to local governments, such as in France, it happened already. And so we see that slowly, step by step, all technologies are available. And if there is a change in the legal framework, it means that everything is there to enter in this situation where it would become mass surveillance in public spaces. And what many studies, many cases have been showing is that besides the inefficiency of such technologies, and Charlotte mentioned also, for instance, how to prevent situations to happen with such artificial intelligence. It's not that clear, but also there are a lot of false positives affecting individuals. and also a lot of biases embedded in those technologies that are actually the biases existing in society. Sexist biases, racist biases, also disproportionately affecting people of color, but also non-white women, and as I said in the introduction, non-binary people or transgender people. And so how, to answer your questions, Patrick, how to protect them from that? I think, first of all, the purpose of the study was also to show what's the current situation. And it's important to have that picture in mind and to see through the map also presented today that these practices where many authorities say that they're not using such technologies, this is actually not true, and it's already implemented as a test, as a test in a specific sanitary situation, but nevertheless, it's being deployed in our member states, although it would be unlawful. In my own country, in Belgium, for instance, the legal framework doesn't exist to authorize the use of such technologies. Also, although we see that they are being deployed and they have been stopped, also for privacy purposes and the incompatibility with the RGPD. But still, the technologies remain in place. They're still there, that they've not been dismantled. So it means that technologies are ready to be used in a case of a legal framework change. So we need, as legislators, to really act and to keep pushing for a ban on biometric surveillance in public spaces. And we need to bring more awareness around this. And this brings me to a question to you, to the speakers of today, and also your own experience, because many issues of data protection and surveillance issues have been revealed on the public space during the COVID crisis. As well, privacy issues as fundamental rights issues have been raised, and we also have such debates related to other aspects of the pandemic gestion, for example, the COVID certificate and so on. So I think there is momentum, a political momentum, to really raise this awareness and implement a proper ban on such surveillance throughout the EU. But I would like to hear you on that. In your practice, with your experience, do you feel there's an evolution also in consciousness, awareness amongst citizens? Or are we still in a situation where people think they have nothing to hide, they have nothing to hide from the authorities, and it wouldn't mind if they are under surveillance?
Jeremy, would you like to start on this one?
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I think so. As a researcher working on social and ethical impacts of technologies, I'm reluctant to take a public stance on these issues and tell people what to do or what to think. But I think I work closely with engineers on a daily basis that develop, let's say, image analysis techniques. And what I find particularly interesting, I would say, are two things. First is the fundamental right discourse doesn't work on many people. Either it works or it doesn't, but you can't move the lines in a discussion with these kinds of argument if they're not compelling. That's one thing. I think the argument that's more compelling to them in a discussion is, and to most people, is the democratic argument. If you succeed in tying democracy to limited security and not to unlimited security, then it's more compelling to them. Because then they see the value of privacy not as only an end in itself, which it is, but also as a means of preserving democracy. So that would be one remark. And Yeah, then I think now there is a momentum and it's important to act and regulate right now. And I think it goes back to a question that has been asked in the chat is, I think there is a very strong impulse that's given by the industry. The industry is driving the development of these technologies and is pushing very strongly for that. And I think these would be the two things I would say, yeah. There is a legislative need right now because the industry is pushing for technologies. And the second bit would be we need to refine the kinds of argument that might help move the lines with people that remain unconvinced by all discourses, all sides. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeremy. And before I pass the question on to Charlotte, there is another question that goes to you, Charlotte, that is coming by email. And they are asking, are organizations such as yours making use of access to documents requests to get hold of information on these kinds of systems? And are you getting substantial answers?
Our organization in particular does not, because we concentrate on engaging with the public and bringing the topic to people who are not think about it or haven't heard about it. Other organizations do. I think regarding the Südkreuz project, there were questions being asked and privacy concerns from the data protection supervisors, which were not answered. Yeah, so it's so. Sometimes you get an answer, sometimes you don't. Yeah, but yeah, we are self-service.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you. And I'll pass on to Francesco. You may want to answer Saskia's question. And also, if I can add one from the chat, do you think that the upcoming EU regulation on AI will likely be sufficient to address the problem or not?
Okay, I'm sorry, the light is vanishing here, so I'm more and more in the dark. I hope you can still see me. I will try still to address the questions. So one organization that works with Freedom of Information Act, for example, is that I know of is Technopolis. I know that there are, a group of institutions based with Quadrature du Net and other organizations. So I think a lot of the information that we have been able to collect for our report is actually thanks to the work of organizations and activists who have been pushing, if you want, the boundary, the gray zone between what is secret and what is not public. And here there is a lot that I think should be done to support activists and to support researchers that make a lot of these, information come to light. Now, maybe because I saw that Charlotte maybe was losing a little bit of optimism about her, the work that is being done in the stations. In our experience, in one of the presentations, because in order to work on the report, we did very limited interviews, but we also assisted to some of these YouTube presentations of companies, for example, showcasing their products. And one company said, actually, we don't sell so much facial recognition to private companies because of the kind of controversies that is attached to it. So where actually for us it's easier to sell regular CCTVs sometimes than those that have all the bells and whistles of these algorithmic security. And for me, this is a great win for organizations like Charlotte's or activism at the level of the European Parliament, because the more there is controversy around some technologies, the more, in particular, private companies, and you can think of shopping malls maybe, or stadiums that would be the primary buyers of these technologies, well, they start to become a little bit worried that it might impact their bottom line. And I think this is also an argument that we don't hear very often. I mean, I agree with most of the arguments that were made here, and the report goes in depth in the relation with law and fundamental law, and I think Jeremy is right to emphasize also the difficulties that there are in terms of these these arguments. But on the other hand, there is also, I think, an economic argument that that should be made. When it comes finally to the question of the current legislative proposition in Europe, I think many organizations, the Greens and EDRI themselves, have also, of course, welcomed a lot of the advancements that come with it, but still remain worried about, in particular, for example, the distinction between the forensic and the live forms of face recognition. So I think there will always be, an important number of elements that still require to keep the guard up when it comes to the dangers of the technologies, and in particular the impact they will have on fundamental rights.
Thank you very much, Francesco. And since we are drawing to the close of our meeting, to conclude, let me say that I think the report that we've presented today and the case studies that we have discussed have shed some more light on biometric mass surveillance spreading in cities across Europe. And they have also underlined the inefficacy of many of these technologies in fighting crime, with projects failing to reach their goals, experiencing high false positive rates, even misidentifying hags for suspicious behavior, for example. And I think this biometric mass surveillance is really a model for step-by-step establishing highly intrusive methods of mass surveillance in our societies. First, we see the development of these technologies, and that's actively supported by the European Union, and apparently with no ethical considerations, because they just argue, well, it's only research. But then we don't have any control over where these technologies are used and sold once they are being developed. And many times the development is actually taking place in secret. So that's why I have sued the EU Commission on one of those projects, the border control projects, where they refuse to release the legal assessment, the ethical assessment, or the results of the study. And I'm happy to announce in public for the first time today that we'll have a judgment on the 15th of December. So that could mean more transparency about the EU surveillance research in the future. The second step often is that the technology is being integrated by industry in their products, often even without asking. If you buy a CCTV camera, it might have these AI features embedded already. And next, this technology is mostly used on vulnerable groups of people or in certain situations, such as on migrants or border hotspots. And then we experience a generalization of these technologies and an expanding purpose. So they are used for more and more purposes. And we can see in China already that they are using them even for the purpose of political repression against Uyghurs, etc. So it's vital for us to help policymakers understand and make governments accept the risks that this development poses to our diverse and open society. And it's vital that by means of the upcoming AI Act, we stop the funding for the development of this technology and we fight for a ban on their use in public spaces. So please spread the word, and also sign the European Citizens Initiative Reclaim Your Face if you haven't done so yet. Thanks to all our panelists for being here. Thanks for the excellent report. And you may want to spread the recording of this webinar by using the same YouTube link that you are watching right now. So thanks to our audience for joining us today. Thank you.